Fair, breakout session number 2. We first start by thanking some of our sponsors, our Creighton Biomedical Sciences Department and Graduate Student Government, as well as the UNL Association of Students of the University of Nebraska and their School of Natural Resources, Graduate Student Association, as well as UNMC Student Senate and UNO Graduate Studies Office. Today I am very honored to introduce Dr. Wolfenbarger. She is a UNL professor and has a great list of experiences to join us today. She is very passionate about her students as well as her research and science. So you can help me in welcoming Dr. Wolfenbarger with communication for grants, papers, interviews, and negotiations.
Will you be able to hear me if I just talk? Yeah, okay, thank you. That'll be easier. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit about my background. I have a relatively unusual career trajectory. Although I'm a professor, I've actually had several other types of positions. And so I have a lot of experience with different types of communication, both written as well as oral. And what I want to do is I hope draw on your knowledge of biological systems and apply it to communication, because I think a lot of times the best communication is if we know inside sort of what the outline we need to do is, sort of what is the roadmap for good communication. And I think all of you guys have it inside of you, but maybe but my presentation will bring it out to the forefront a little bit and sort of make you have connections with your own knowledge.
Okay.
So I have a PhD in biology, and I started out as a basic scientist studying animal communication. I worked on northern cardinals and the visual communication system that they have. And then I also worked on these really cool flies. They're called stalk-eyed flies. The males have their eyes literally at the end of stalks, and they function in both male-male interactions and also in communication with females with mate choice. And I was really interested in the genetic basis of this trait. So I have a background in ecology, genetics, and evolution from sort of that basic background. In the early 2000s, I started on kind of jumped to a really different career trajectory, and I started synthesizing science and kind of prioritizing research gaps as a science policy fellow. And I encourage this, I really plug this program to any of you who are in a PhD program and are looking for opportunities after your PhD program. This program takes scientists and it actually places them into government offices. There are also congressional policy fellowships as well. And you're basically the scientist in this office, and you may be asked to do things that have very little to do with your PhD, but because of the, sort of that basic critical thinking and analysis skills that you've honed, you're actually really well qualified for the tasks that you're told to do. And so the area, because of the molecular genetics experience and then my ecology evolution, I actually started working on ecological impacts of genetically engineered crops. And so that began sort of a whole new career trajectory for me. I worked as a fellow, and then I worked as actually a federal employee in the Environmental Protection Agency. And at that point in my career, I had a child, and my husband and I we were both working in DC. We loved our jobs, but it wasn't the right fit for us to raise our family there. And so we started looking for other opportunities. My husband had got an offer from UNO as a faculty member, and I was actually hired as a staff member to be a prairie manager. I knew nothing about prairies, but for those of you, I don't know how much you guys know about dual academic careers, but it's pretty challenging to get 2 faculty positions in the same place, in the same location. And my husband and I had the philosophy that you know, whoever gets the job is the unlucky one, and whoever gets to come along and figure out what to do is the lucky one, you know. So I was the lucky one, and I got to be a prairie manager for about 3 years, really having hands-on experience with trying to take science about how to restore prairies, how to manage prairies, and then implement it in the UNO Prairie Preserve System. And it was a fascinating job to have, but I still missed doing more active science. And in 2004, the conservation biologist left UNO, and I was lucky enough. The department offered me the position because they loved my husband. They liked me too, but I was really honored to actually get a faculty position. It was half-time at first by my choice, and then about 3 years, 2012, so yeah, 3 years ago, I went to a full-time position. So that kind of gives you a flavor for my career trajectory. So I've been on different sides of science, doing different things, using science, and I still do a lot of active synthesis of science, working, taking research and delivering it to people who will use it for decision making. And this is this sort of job that I have. I work in grassland conservation and in a working landscape. So, you know, land is used for many, many different things, not just conservation. And the goal of my research and my science communication is how can we have win-win situations for land use and conservation. Okay, so that's the underlying philosophy of my research and my scholarship. And I've been doing this for many, many years, but it's really, the work that I do was really encapsulated or like articulated way better than I've ever articulated it by a editorial piece that Bill Schlesinger published in Science in 2010 on translational ecology. Those of you who are from the Med Center, we talk about translational medicine, and this has become a really, you know, hot topic, you know, sexy topic. And so it's been applied to ecology, physiology, you know, you pick your favorite biology subdiscipline, and there's now that translational discipline, right? But I think it's a really, even though it's a sexy term, it's a really, and trendy term, it's a really powerful idea for how to do research. And I still think that basic research for knowledge acquisition is of high priority for our society, but this is also of very high value. I love this quote here. Yet despite producing enormous amount of new information, ecologists are often unable to convey knowledge effectively to the public and to policymakers. Unless the discoveries of ecological science are rapidly translated into meaningful actions, they will remain quietly archived while the biosphere degrades. You can substitute, you know, any words for ecologists and ecological science. The same thing is true if we're trying to develop new drugs and new treatments. If we just publish this knowledge but never get it into the pipeline for development, it's just sitting there, right? And so communication is an incredibly important part of science. We've got great biological models of information flow and communication. And for those of you who have had biology recently or are studying biology, this is really familiar. This is the central dogma of molecular biology. And I think molecular biologists call it the central dogma of biology. And this is basically just how information flows in a cell. The information is stored in DNA molecule. It's transcribed into a working copy into an RNA molecule. It's translated into another language of proteins, and then there's some function of that protein and a cellular response. Okay, that is a model of information flow for some communication, and yet translation, transcription, all depend on the coordination of many, many molecules, okay? And communication is the same way, requires some coordination. And as the person who wants to do some communication, you're the coordinator, right? You're coordinating that communication. Information flow also depends on feedback in that cell. That it's not a linear one-way process, but it's regulated by feedback. And that's another really important component of communication, that two-way feedback. And there's another great quote in this editorial talking about that, the idea that translational ecology, translational medicine, it just doesn't matter what discipline you use here, should connect end users. Who's going to use that knowledge of environmental science to the field research carried out by scientists who study the basis of environmental problems. Translational ecology requires constant two-way communication between stakeholders and scientists. Okay, so this idea that feedback loop is what further enhances communication and strengthens it. And so here's sort of a, cell model of translational ecology. The idea that we need synthesis. We have to have some translation because the people who generate the research are not the people who use the research. And then ideally, that information results in a decision and an action. Okay. We have another model for biology communication. Remember that my basic training was in animal communication, and I like this model of communication as well. You can think of the sender and receiver. The receiver could be your dog, right? That we've got lots of experience communicating with animals, communicating with each other. So there's the key components are there's a sender, there's some information that's going to go out into the environment, and there's a receiver. A lot of times that receiver, we're trying to, there's some type of influence that is going to happen. There's going to be a decision and a response that may in turn affect the sender. And then we've got that non-target audience as well, that eavesdropper, as it's called in animal communication, okay? And so I think this is a really great way to start thinking about writing grants, publishing papers, going on interviews, and doing negotiations. And having that full picture of communication in your mind before you start your grant, before you start your paper, before you go to your interview, and before you start your negotiations. And so I'm going to kind of go through and have you think through how this applies to those endeavors, okay? And I'm going to break it down into, really strict biology. You are the sender. And you've got a lot of control as the sender because you choose what's known as the signal modality. You choose how to deliver that information, right? And so some of it is a done deal, right? You're going to publish a paper, you don't have a lot of choice about your signal modality, but you have some, okay? And you're going to influence every single modality that you can and manipulate, influence that receiver, the grant reviewers, the program officer, okay? And so think about that as you're starting these endeavors. And the other thing that we can learn from cell communication, from animal communication, choose the best and choose the most. How many different ways can you send the signal so that the receiver, it has multiple messages, okay? So use the best and use the most. that you absolutely can. As humans, we primarily, I think for grants, papers, interviews, and negotiations, I think we use 4 of our 5 senses. I tried really hard to figure out how we use taste, but I couldn't come up with an example. So if you have one, you can tell me. Okay, so visual communication. Okay, you got to think about how is your message being visualized? And for a grant and a paper, it means absolutely following every single guideline from that granting agency exactly. Okay? You follow the rules. If it says 11-point font, it means 11-point font. And if you don't have enough space and you change it to 10-point font, no. You're gonna have 11-point font because that's the visual message that you're being told to send. Same is true with formatting, typos, all of that. Think about it as visual communication as that grant reviewer is looking at that grant, okay? Everything has to be perfect, okay? Perfect. Same is true for interviewing and negotiation, the way you present yourself. Visual communication is the way we dress, the way we hold our body, what our facial expressions are. You control all of that. So you control the visual communication of your message. In grants and papers, we have our written communication, which is visual, right? But we can also use graphs and figures. That's another modality that grant reviewers and paper reviewers are getting your message in multiple ways. Take time with your figures. Take time with your tables to make them as easy to understand as possible. Okay? That's visual communication. You're capturing ideas and messages in a graphical form. Ribbit. The acoustical communication, what we're doing right now, presentations. This becomes really important for interviews and negotiations, of course. It's also important for grants and papers because your colleagues review your grants. Your colleagues are your peer reviews when you submit a paper. And so anytime you're giving any kind of acoustic communication, think about that, okay? Because the message that you deliver acoustically may influence your grants and your papers, all right? So what you say and how you say it becomes really important things to be mindful of. Olfactory communication. We take messages from olfaction. We do. All right? There's a whole rich research area of this. When you go to the interview, you want to be able to be as unobtrusive as possible. And this isn't necessarily self-evident. You don't wear strong perfumes. If you do, you may be communicating something that is offensive to another person. Okay? And just hygiene becomes a really important component of interviews and negotiations. And again, as those affect your interactions with humans who may be evaluating you. So always be aware of the fact that humans, we do communicate using olfaction, okay? And I'm not saying it's necessarily intentional, but that is a mode of communication. Tactile communication. This is really important, and especially in American culture, okay? The handshake is a communication skill that often has to be learned. Here in the United States and also Europe, those of us who are Christian at church, one of the rituals at the very beginning is sort of this greeting, and you turn to the other person. Sometimes it's at the end too, depending on the church, but you turn to the person and you say, peace be with you. There's a very characteristic handshake that goes with that. It's a very soft grip. Okay, it's a warm communication. It's either a greeting or a parting that's kind and warm. That's not the kind of handshake for an interview or a negotiation or meeting someone in American culture. Firm handshake, not the death grip, but a firm handshake. And in American culture, in the business community, the professional community, a weak handshake is a little creepy for us. And so having that firm handshake becomes really important. So, am I right? It is a little creepy, yeah. But it's not something that is necessarily taught specifically to people. It's something that you just learn by experience of what a handshake is supposed to be. All right, so you control all of those things. And you need to think about those things, be mindful of those things as you're going through these processes. Okay, let's go back to our diagram and look at that next one, information and environment. Okay, so you control the message, you're going to develop the message. Your intellect is going to think about how best to construct the message, whether it's verbal or written. But there's a big, big, big but in the room. The environment may alter it, okay? How many of you have given presentations in these god-awful rooms that are like really narrow and really long, and there's a screen that's like this big, okay? You can have the best talk in the world, you can have the most awesome slides, but the environment has just trashed your presentation, right? And so you've got to be mindful of that. That extreme example, I'm not sure there's anything you can do except maybe like have some bigger poster board. I'm not sure how you would deal with that situation. But again, thinking about what environment is my message going to be delivered to. If you're writing a grant that's going to be submitted to NSF or NIH, think about the grant reviewer who, a couple weeks before the panel, gets a stack, well, no longer a stack, but an inbox full of long grants. This person has a regular job. They're not a professional grant reviewer. They do this, all of our peer review is done free. We don't get paid for it. We'll get expenses paid to travel to DC, but we don't get paid for our reviewing. When you agree to peer review a paper, you don't get paid for that. It goes on your time. It's extra, okay? Are you going to make that grant reviewer's life difficult by hiding your message in the last paragraph of the grant? Are you going to bring it forward to the first sentence of every paragraph? When I was taught to write grants and papers, I was taught, think of your reviewer as reading only the first sentence of every paragraph. And if you can get your message in the first sentence of every paragraph, you got a good chance of communicating to that reviewer, all right? Think about that person and how busy that person is, that they're not trying to understand what you think you're trying to say, all right? They're just trying to read as fast as possible and get this done as fast as possible. And that's a cynical way to think about it, but that's how you control the environment, okay? You're putting the worst possible case scenario in the environment, and you're gonna make your message stand out even though the environment may be against you, okay? So that's that's the plan of attack to take. All right, now let's talk about that receiver. Because that receiver, we want a response from that receiver, right? We want our paper published, we want our grant funded, we want the interview, and we want more money when we ask for it in the negotiation. You got to know everything there possibly is to know about that receiver, okay? You've got to do your research. You've got to put yourself in that person's place. What is that person doing? What is that person like? What is that panel like? Who's on it? What are their interests? What papers have they published? All right? So you're going to do your research. You're going to do a ton of research about your receiver so that you can craft your message for that particular receiver. You have to know your audience. Whether your audience is a grant reviewer, peer reviewer, who's going to do the hiring. When you go on an interview, you're going to look on the website. You're going to know every single person in that department and what they work on, so that when you go up to them, the message that you send to them is, I did my homework, I know who you are, I know what you work on, and I am so interested in you, right? That's the message that you want to send. I want to be a part of this place so bad that I did everything I possibly could to know everything about you, okay? And that's not creepy, okay? That's not creepy. That could be flattering, okay? So you do your homework about your audience. The same is true for, the way I would talk to a policymaker is totally different than the way I teach introductory biology, right? Totally different audience. And so knowing your audience helps you craft that message. Whenever you're invited for a talk, you ask who's in the audience. It was really great for this audience. They had demographic information, and so I got sent information. I had to ask for it, but I got information about who would be likely to be in the audience and what your backgrounds are, where you're from, and what your training was. It's really helpful, super helpful. All right. Here are 8 communication lessons from me. Know your audience. I think that's number 1. Absolutely number 1. That's the starting place for communication. Prepare for your audience. Anticipate your audience. Think about what objections might they have to my research? What objections might they have for me asking for this particular resource in a negotiation? Okay? Anticipate what their response might be and prepare for that. Anticipate your environment. And then once you've done those things, now you're going to work on your message. What is it that I'm going to communicate? How am I going to craft that information? And then, again, use multiple modalities and listen to your audience. Think about that feedback. Listen with multiple modalities, and by that, I mean you listen acoustically when somebody is, when you're in a presentation interaction. You also listen with your body language, all right? This is defensive. This is not, okay? Right? And so think about how you're presenting yourself when you're listening. When you're responding to reviewer comments, whether they're grant reviewers or paper reviewers, I won't curse, but every time I read a review, there's at least one comment that I just want to go off at the person. It's just like, that was the stupidest thing that how could you be so stupid? But you would never lead with that in the rebuttal, okay? Never, all right? All right, so I thought it would be fun to practice 3 practical skills. One is the handshake. So turn around to the person next to you, behind you, and just shake their hand, nice firm handshake. No, I'm serious. It's a good time to practice.
Okay, we're going to practice until
And then I put the piece of wood on. It's kind of professional. called the elevator speech. This is common. Do people know what the elevator speech is? Okay. This is the 2-minute rundown on what you're interested in. You know, what your background is. And then, and all the person wants is like a little blurb. It's like 2 minutes. Then if they're interested, they'll ask a follow-up question for more details, or maybe there isn't time for that. So this is like you're meeting someone for an interview, or you're meeting someone at a meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, getting a little close to the camera. You gotta have your elevator speech prepared. Okay, so turn to the next person, or do the elevator speech just to practice and think about: do I have my elevator speech down? No. Who has their elevator speech down? Come on, 2 minutes. All right, this is something literally to write out. Like, think about it before you go to a meeting, before you go to an interview. How can you communicate what you're interested in 2 minutes? And literally write it out and craft it, okay? It'll help you. It really will. Because when you deliver that message, you're going to be confident. Your voice is going to be confident. You're going to be relaxed because, hey, you know the answer to that question. Okay. The last one, and I haven't been on a lot of interviews, but I have been on interviews, and my husband has been on interviews, and there's always one person who really didn't look at your resume or your CV, has no idea that you're even interviewing, but they signed up to talk with you, fortunately. And so their approach to an interview is, tell me about yourself. Oh my God, it's the worst. Prepare for the worst, okay? Tell me about yourself. If you're given an open-ended, and think of it as an opportunity. Like if you get it the first time and you're not prepared, it's a nightmare. Second time, it's an opportunity because you get to tell the person exactly what you want to tell them. They haven't asked anything specific, and so it's your opportunity to tell them about what you want to tell them. Okay? So, yeah.
Don't you think it's kind of, if it's not someone who was unprepared, but who is like literally the PI of the lab starts in with, so tell me about yourself. It's like a trick question, right? Because they want you to give away something, or like, do they really want to know something that's totally unrelated to science if you're interviewing in science, or do they really want to know your personality and they just kind of want to watch you as you explain something?
So I think it's used in that way. It can be a way of trying to. I honestly think it's a way to either you're not prepared and so you just want to just like have a shotgun approach. I truly believe that. Second, I think it can be meant to just kind of throw the person off guard and see how they react. But it's a pretty common. I mean, it happens quite a bit.
So, but what do you think as far as what you shouldn't talk about potentially? Like, I feel like when they ask about yourself, they're trying to get you to talk about something non-job related. And if you start talking about your academic focus or whatever, like, does that sort of tell them you don't know how to talk about anything else, or you're trying to hide something? You know?
Yeah, sure. So I think that if you're in a formal interview setting, even if the question is meant to draw out personal information, I think you want to stay on the professional message no matter what. In a dinner situation, maybe it is meant as a more social thing and you would talk about hobbies, or if you chose and wanted to talk about your family or something like that, that would be appropriate. I think as an opening question, I'm talking about this as an opening question, it's meant in a professional way. You know, tell me about your interests, tell me about your accomplishments, those sorts of things. Yeah. Yeah.
Would it be appropriate to ask them specifically what they're looking for?
Yeah, and I think getting more feedback on the question is totally appropriate. You know, are you interested in hearing about my research, my teaching, my outreach, if it's not an academic job, my management skills, whatever the position would be focused on. Yeah, I think it's always, but again, my experience, I'm probably rude, but I think a lot of times it's just unprepared interviewers. I was just gonna, this is the end of my formal presentation. I really did want to just answer questions for the remaining time. How much time do we have, Jamie?
We have about 15 more minutes.
Yeah, so please, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Yeah.
And like here, students are encouraged to do voluntary work, right? So, do you have to? I mean, like where do the students put that thing? I mean, if it's like a job interview, not a college interview, so do you put those things? Like I did volunteer here, volunteer there. Does it make any sense with respect to the interview, or is just showing?
So typically on a CV, there's a section where you call it service. Okay, so it's professional service. So if you're a peer reviewer for a paper, you would put that as professional service. If you go and give presentations to K through 12 schools on science, you would put that in service. And then I think in terms of an interview, I think that it can enhance your interview, it can enhance your job application, but at least for faculty positions, mostly what you're going to be evaluated on is on your research and teaching experience. So having been on many faculty searches, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but we count publications, we look at the consistency of publication record, where they're published, and then in terms of teaching experience, and I'm at UNO, so teaching is a really large part of our job. We look for people who we think have really had real classroom experience, so that they're the instructor of record. They've had to prepare a lecture 3 times a week for 15 weeks, and they know what it takes. But different universities have different priorities, and we probably put a higher priority on teaching experience than a major research university would. Yeah. Did I answer your question? Okay. Yeah.
So I've got knowing your audience.
Yes.
Some of these predoctoral and postdoctoral fellowships, I don't think you get their email until it gets assigned. Your suggestions for knowing your audience for those types of fellowships?
So I think the trick there is that at least if it's an NSF, NIH, you know that the panel is going to be relatively informed for your discipline, but maybe not the experts, right? So it's not going to be as specialized as a particular NIH panel, right? And so I think what's important is to have the introductory information that's going to satisfy someone who is informed, but not like a leading expert in the field. And then you have to cover yourself that it's likely that a leading expert in the field is also going to review it, and you provide the detail in your experimental design, analysis, the conceptual framework to satisfy that person. So basically, you've got 2 different audiences in that kind of a situation. Another question, please. Well, I'm available to here for lunch, and if you want to talk with me one-on-one, I'm more than happy to talk with you. So thank you.
This concludes our breakout session number 2. Feel free to have some snacks and drinks in the hallway until we have lunch starting at noon with our keynote speaker, Dr. Susan Carson.